What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to a new edition of Batter Up Podcast, sponsored by the Dugout of Millwood Sports Insanity Network. I am Mike Rifkin. Hope everyone's doing well on this Monday before Thanksgiving. This is not going to be a full podcast. This is not going to be, shouldn't be an extremely long video. This is a reaction to the trade that occurred yesterday afternoon, Sunday, between the New York Mets and the Texas Rangers, where the Mets sent Brandon Nimmo to the Texas Rangers for Marcus Semien 1-for-1. And I wanted to take 24 hours or so to collect my feelings and thoughts about this trade. The reason being this, there's a couple of reasons. One, Brandon Nimmo being a career Met, lifelong Met. And two, the part of what does the Marcus Semien addition mean? And also kind of where does, in context, where do things fall? And after about 24 hours or so, I don't know, but I'm going to try to think about where I think the Mets are going. Let's start with Nimmo, the part about Nimmo. I think everyone knows it is safe to say that this team really disappointed this year. Their failure to make the playoffs was unacceptable with the payroll and the roster. And there are moves that have to be made. And David Stearns, at his end of the season press conference, brought up two words multiple times: run prevention. It was kind of like the scene in Moneyball where Brad Pitt brings Jonah Hill into the room with the scouts, and they have the conversation about how do you replace Jason Giambi. And the thought is by Jonah Hill, you don't replace Giambi with one player, you replace him with two or three because he gets on base, that scene. But I look at this from a Met perspective, and Brandon Nimmo's defense over the years, and listen, he was never a Gold Glove guy. But with his bad knee and his plantar fasciitis, defensively, he has taken a step back. And this was a time where, hey, David Stern said, you know what? Maybe we can make this work. We're going to grab a former Gold Glove Award winner to play second base. And we're going to shore up the middle of the defense. And now we are going to have, now they have two holes in the outfield. So we'll get into that in a few minutes. Does it suck to see Brandon Nimmo leave? To a degree, it does. It sucks when any player leaves, especially a guy who's been with the team their whole career. We saw that with Jose Reyes and others. The only guy in the history of this franchise, for now, who stuck around was David Wright. And I do think there's going to be a carryover into another free agent. We'll get into that in a few minutes, too. But look, Nimmo's defense has been declining. And I think because of the addition of Soto, the role of Brandon Nimmo had to change. Nimmo was not a top two hitter in the line. Because it just didn't fit. And so Nimmo's game had to change this year because they put him in a more of a run producing role. And he had a good year. He had 25 homers, 92 RBIs. But it's the defense. And that's what David Stearns was banking on. And if you want to take the emotions out, which I am trying to do here, in a baseball sense, this makes sense. Marcus Semien is a good player. He's a Gold Glove finalist and winner. Didn't have the best year offensively last year, was banged up a little bit. He's also a couple of years older than Nimmo, but also he's not signed for as long of term. So there's that as well. But yeah, listen, losing a guy, and it kind of hit hard when I think it was Mike Puma, the Post, who had it. Nimmo consulted Jacob DeGrom on Texas, and that's where it kind of hit me. It was like those two guys could have been Mets for life. And we all think DeGrom's 48 should go up on the retired numbers area. Nimmo probably really close, but he just didn't have the numbers. But look, it was a baseball trade. And I think if we are one thing Met fans should be immune to is that this franchise just doesn't. David Stearns can now build this team kind of in his fixture. Couldn't do that last offseason. One, because they wanted to get Soto, but two, and more importantly, the run to the NLCS. That's why he really couldn't make solid changes after last season. So now David Stearns can kind of build this thing to the way he sees it, in my opinion. And so it starts Nimmo for Semien. There's also been talk about breaking up this core. And my question for people is, how do you define the core? What was the core of this team? Some would describe it as it was Nimmo, McNeil, Alonso, Lindor, now Soto. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper because I think the core is a little bit deeper. Nimmo was a member of the core. McNeil was a member of the core. Pete, definitely a member of the core. Lindor, Soto, and then Edwin Diaz as well as a member of this core. I didn't name a starting pitcher as a member of this core. The reason why, there's two reasons why. One, they take the ball every fifth day. But two, and more importantly, the Mets don't have that guy. And we're going to get into that too. So, what does Marcus Semien bring? He brings another right-handed bat, which is important, and he brings Gold Glove defense. So I'm kind of wondering now if they're going to toy with Lindor hitting leadoff, Semien in the 2 spot, then Soto, and then hitting cleanup. We'll get into who I think should be hitting cleanup. So I kind of wonder if that's how the lineup's going to be fixated or constructed. The other part, and I think this is really important too, someone's going to ask, how do you replace Nimmo's on pace percentage? And I don't think it's, again, like that scene, Moneyball, I don't think it's a one-person job. I think they expect Francisco Alvarez to bounce back. I think they expect Marcus Semien to have a very good year. I think they have a high expectation for who's going to play third base. And I think I know where we're going here. And so I think there's enough there for what Semien, and from everything I've heard and read, Semien's a good clubhouse guy, so it shouldn't have any impact on that. But you can't react to this. And I think a lot of people have. I don't think you can have a reaction to this without knowing what comes next. Because now the Mets have basically said, we have one outfielder right now. Technically, two, because Tyrone Taylor was tendered a contract. But I don't think they want Tyrone Taylor playing every day because the bat's just not there. So, what comes next? Well, they got a plethora of options here. I think option one, and this would be something to not cave into the Met fan, but I think this is something you kind of owe it to the Met fan based on what just happened. Pete's got to come back. Pete Alonso now has to come back. Because now you're not just replacing Nimmo defensively. You've got to replace his 25 and 92. Pete hit 38 and drove over 100 runs. So then combined, you have to replace 60 homers. And I get it. They think they could do it. They may be able to do with multiple guys. I'm not watching that. With Pete saying he can DH, I think now you have to resign Pete Alonso. 5 years, 200, whatever it is. I think he would take that in a heartbeat. I think now you have to go to Pete. So now your infield looks like this. It's Pete. You have to go. It's Pete. It's Simeon. It's Lindor. Who's playing third base? My view, it's Brett Beatty. I think Brett Beatty showed you enough last year that he can handle it. I also think he could platoon with Ronnie Mauricio. I think Mauricio and Beatty could also give Simeon a day if he needs it. Or if they wanted to DH Simeon a day, they could do that. You still have Jet Williams. You still have Acuna as well. We'll get into both of them. So I think if you go Beatty and Mauricio at third, Simeon's at second, Luis Angel Acuna, if he's got a spot on this team, it's probably as a utility man. And then there's Jet Williams, who now I kind of wonder about his future. Because we know he can play center field. We heard he could do it in AAA. There's also Carson Bench. I just told you the Mets don't have an ace. Do they revisit a Tarek Skubal deal? Maybe headlined it with Jet Williams. Maybe that's something. They also have holes in center and left field. I don't think Kyle Tucker's coming. Nor do I think that should be the expectation of the Met fan. Because listen, we know Steve Cohen has the money. Kyle Tucker's a very good baseball player. Not necessarily sure that's where I would go. You could go get Cody Bellinger. He's a free agent. And he can do something a little bit different than Kyle Tucker. Cody Bellinger could play center field. And I can call up Benj or Jet Williams, whoever they want. Maybe they play left field. And instead of them having to cover all the ground in center, they can cover the ground in left field. Because you're already down defensively in right field because Soto's not a great defender. Although I was a little bit surprised with some of the balls he was able to get to this year. Better defensively than I thought. Totally will say that. But now, it's you need two outfielders to upgrade. So you bring Pete back and you bring in, let's say it's Bellinger. Maybe you want to play Benj in left or Jet Williams in left. The other guy who can play center field, and I think they might revisit this, Luis Robert Jr. I wonder if Luis Robert they come calling back to the White Sox and going, hey, what do you think? What would you take now for Luis Robert? They picked up his $20 million option. I think he has one more for next season. Although We have to wait and see on if there is a next season. Is that something that would intrigue David Stearns? I know they talked about near the deadline. Would that be a guy that intrigues them? And I think the other guy here, because Tyron Taylor's going to be your number 4 outfielder, and you're probably going to carry a fifth. So, and Juan Soto's kind of been vocal about bringing back Starling Marte. And I don't think Marte's going to cost you much. Maybe it's 5 million with incentives, something along those lines. So maybe that those are your 5 outfielders. And Marte's not going to play the field every day. You know he can't. And you go into with a DH platoon. Well, I mean, you can't really DH Mauricio and Marte just because they're both right-handed. You need a left-handed bat maybe to help with the DH role. I digress. Anyway, there's options out there for David Stearns. And the availability, or excuse me, the ability of Simeon, who plays basically every day too, played 127 games this year. You know, Nimmo was probably up near 160. I know Simeon had spent some time on the injured list, but he's also 35. So you got to be a little bit careful about that. But I kind of understand what David Stearns is going for. Where do you think you can win? You think you can win up the middle? If you think about it, he's not wrong. How did the Dodgers win up the middle? Well, they moved Mookie Betts over to shortstop. That didn't hurt them. Will Smith behind the plate doesn't hurt them. You know, second base almost does not matter because those guys are so good. You have to be strong up the middle. And instead of committing 7 or 8 years to Bo Bichette, they commit 3 years to Marcus Simeon. And let me be blunt when I say this. As Simeon even ages out, you can open the door for one of these young kids to play second base. Not every day, maybe twice a week. Jet Williams is on this roster. He's playing second. Acuna's playing second base twice a week. Spot Simeon a day at DH. There's now options here with these young players. So I think that's very important. Now it also gives David Stearns an ability to trade these guys. I brought up Robert. Maybe you could center a deal around Mark Vientos that way. You know, Schoolbull, maybe you center it around Jet Williams and a couple of other prospects. I think now David Stearns has some flexibility when it comes to the prospects. I think that's important here. And he doesn't have a position, and I don't even want to say clog because clog is the wrong word. He doesn't have a position that is being used right outside of shortstop and right field. Lindor, Soto, those are your locked up guys. Although Lindor might be open to DHing a little bit more as he gets a little bit older. But I think now what you have to do if you're David Stearns is you have to bring back Alonso. And now your lineup is looking fairly decent because now you could go Lindor, Simeon, Soto, Alonso. And then who you want to hit 5, maybe that's Cody Bellinger. Maybe that is Luis Robert, whoever's playing center field. And then you're getting into Alvarez and Beatty. And all of a sudden, those things are working out for the New York Mets. So now there is an opportunity here. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say bad things about Brandon Nimmo, but Nimmo was in a spot in left field Now, I'm not going to sit here and say he was clogging up left field, but defensively hasn't been sharp. But I think the important thing is this: now there's flexibility. And in a couple of years, there's a little bit more financial flexibility. But I think right now where the Mets are, this was an important deal. It was important because it kind of shakes up the core. But it's also important that he brought in a guy who's also considered a good clubhouse guy and a guy who's won. The other thing that I think is next, outside of bringing back Pete Alonso, is I think Jeff McNeil. This signs the fate Jeff McNeil is no longer a New York Met. Jeff McNeil's gone. Where he's going, what he goes for, I don't know. Maybe it's a back end starter. Although I don't think the Mets need another back end starter. I'll say this: I know the idea I'm open to, and it puts third base back in play, and so kind of opens up things other than this. What if you did McNeil, maybe Senga, unless Senga's open to doing something else? What if you did McNeil and something for Nolan Arenado? And then all of a sudden, your infield's Arenado, Lindor, Simeon, and Alonso. Now, that's a very old infield. That's an older infield. So I'm not sure David Stearns and Steve Cohen want to go that route. But I don't think Jeff McNeil's on this roster next year. I think he's the next one to go. Maybe it's even in that deal for a big time starter. And I say that because from reports, Detroit wants some big league ready talent if they're going to move off of Skubal, which again we don't know what's going on there. Um, but I think David Stearns did right here. I can't sit here and criticize this until I think we know what's next. And that to me is bringing back Pete. It's figuring out what you're going to do in center field. Also, a little bit in left field. You got figured both those things out. And then you got to figure out this Edwin Diaz thing. And according to Will Salmon of the Athletic, term is the one thing here holding this up. Diaz would like 5. The Mets really don't want to do 5. Like, to me, this is just so stupid. Guy's the best closer in the game, especially with Mason Miller now looking like he may go to the Padre bullpen or Padre rotation rather. I mean, where are you going to go, Robert Suarez? That's not your answer. Edwin Diaz has been a Met. He's been a good Met, and he knows how to pitch in New York, and that's so important when a guy comes here. Brandon Nimmo, same thing. He was able to handle the New York media. 4 with an option for Diaz for a 5th year. Vesting option. I don't care. Get it done. Diaz needs to be a Met. Pete Alonso needs to be a Met. And then David Stearns can go exploring for his left fielder, his center fielder, and the ace he so desperately needs to add. Because now this roster is taking shape the way he wants it. Nimmo was just the first pin. The next pin, I think, is Jeff McNeil. But I will say this. If Pete Alonso's not on this roster next year, and the Mets stink again, and Pete goes off and has a great year, the fans are going to turn on David Stearns quick. Some of them have already turned. I'm not turning on David Stearns. I'm going to give him benefit of the doubt based on last year. But this club doesn't win next year. I'm not even saying the World Series. Just make the playoffs next year. Everyone wants to win the World Series, but once you get to the playoffs, it's a whole different game. the fans are going to turn, and he may not care about that. But I'll say this: if Pete's not there opening day playing first base or DH, actually, you know what? I just kind of thought of something off the top of my head because Pete, we're talking about open the DH, and he wants to play first base. I mean, the other guy, and I talked about this with the old ops guy. What if you brought in a Luis Arise to play a little bit too? He can give you some reps at first base. He can give you some reps at DH. That's another guy, and he's different from this club because contact. But David Stearns has now got making this team into what he thinks, and he wants defense and he wants pitching, and combine the two. That's what David Stearns wants. It was big words were run prevention. Well, right now, they need to figure out how they're going to score some runs. The offense wasn't great last year either. The pitching let them down. But right now, what's got to happen is this. We are going to say this. That's how David Stearns is going to make this team into his vision. Brandon Nimmo was a great man. There's no doubt about it. Things will change quickly if David Stearns doesn't bring back Pete Alonso. And there is going to be a turning point with this fan base of David Stearns. This is not Milwaukee. You can act like the smartest guy in the room. But right now, this fan base is down. Not because of the Nimmo trade, because this team missed the playoffs last year. David Stearns is walking kind of on eggshells here. I kind of like this move. But let's see what happens next before we really get into it. Okay. That'll do it. This mini edition of the Batter Up podcast, sponsored by the Dugout Mode, here on the Sports Insanity Network. Like, comment, subscribe here on the YouTube channel. Follow us on the socials: Facebook, the Sports Insanity Network; Twitter, @InsanityReal. You can follow me personally on Twitter @PawnMaster Rifkin. Same name on the Blue Sky. We will definitely keep you covered. Batter Up will. Winter meetings start next weekend. So we'll keep you covered for that. Until next time, I'll talk to you all later. Thanks for listening to Batter Up.